Top authors, current articles are on this channel. Trump sycophant seeks shelter from grand jury probe. Lindsey Graham makes a mockery of the Constitution's speech and debate clause. No man is above the law is a concept long at the heart of American jurisprudence. But now there's Senator Lindsey Graham, former Trump opponent turned sycophant, doing his best to prove that adage wrong. The South Carolina Republican is pulling out all the legal stops to convince a federal judge that he's oh so special. So special in fact that a mere appearance before a grand jury in Fulton County, GA, would violate the Constitution's free speech and debate clause, which was designed to shield members of Congress from unnecessary intrusions into their legislative activities. The showdown with the special grand jury that Graham is trying so desperately to avoid involves two phone calls he made in the wake of President Trump's electoral defeat in November of 2020 to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, calls Raffensperger has said publicly, and presumably to the grand jury, he found deeply troubling. Raffensperger, a Republican, was also on the receiving end of a phone call from Trump himself on January 2, 2021, in which Trump asked the secretary if he could just find an additional 11,780 votes. That conversation became part of a second Trump impeachment proceeding. Graham's November 13, 2020, phone call, according to the secretary and verified by one aide who was listening in on the conversation, also involved the possible disqualification of ballots in the closely contested Georgia race. Graham asked whether political bias might have caused election workers to accept absentee ballots with non-matching signatures and whether the secretary could throw out all absentee ballots in counties with higher rates of non-matching signatures. The allegation spurred the filing of a complaint with the Senate Ethics Committee. Graham was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time, and has made him a key witness in the investigation undertaken by Fulton County District Attorney Fani T. Willis, a probe in which Willis has already notified at least 18 people they are targets, including Trump advisor Rudolph Giuliani. Graham is thus far only a witness, but that can be subject to change, which perhaps explains his feverish attempts to avoid a grand jury appearance. We will go as far as we need to go and do whatever needs to be done to make sure that people like me can do their jobs without fear of some county prosecutor coming after you, he said. Graham's legal team won a reprieve last Sunday when a federal appeals court temporarily blocked his testimony and bumped the case back down to U.S. District Court Judge Lee Martin May to sort through whether Graham is entitled to any kind of modification of the grand jury subpoena by virtue of his position as a federal lawmaker. Article 1, Section 6 of the U.S. Constitution states, members of Congress shall not be questioned in any other place for any speech or debate in either house. Judge May has already expressed skepticism that all of Graham's testimony would come under the speech and debate clause. She wrote that topics could include acts that were political in nature rather than legislative, including efforts to coordinate with the Trump campaign and comments Graham made outside of Congress about the 2020 election. A friend of the court brief filed by 6 former federal prosecutors, including former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, pressed that point. Senator Graham's motion rests on the premise that every subject about which the subpoena seeks testimony is shielded by legislative privilege, the brief notes. In other words, he would have this court hold that virtually every aspect of his behavior relating to the 2020 Georgia election was legislative in character, including making calls to Georgia election officials, arranging those calls, communicating with third parties about the planning and execution of those calls, making public statements about his calls and conduct respecting the Georgia election, and communicating with the Trump campaign and other parties about any efforts to influence the election results. The brief also raises the issue of cajoling, calling it black-letter law that contacting an executive agency in order to influence its conduct is not a legislative act. Graham isn't the first politician to try to hide behind the speech and debate clause. It didn't help Trump ally Representative Jody Hice, a Georgia Republican, also called before the special grand jury. May ruled that Hice had to testify, although she did note that some questions might be off-limits, a path she may well follow in Graham's case. The speech and debate clause was never intended to be some kind of blanket immunity, or the last refuge of legislative scoundrels. It certainly wasn't meant to allow Trump toadies like Graham free rein to interfere in a free and fair presidential election or to aid others in doing so.